The day Brussels hesitated. It was not indecision. It was calculation stretched too long. In Brussels, the danger was not action taken too soon, but action delayed just enough to change the outcome. To understand why this moment mattered, we need to return to how Europe learned to govern crises collectively. Decisions were no longer national. They were layered across institutions, mandates, and consensus. That structure was designed to prevent unilateral mistakes. It also made timing fragile. Today, that fragility still defines how Europe responds under pressure. The story begins with warning signals that arrived without urgency. Funding markets tightened unevenly. Cross-border flows slowed. No single country was under threat, yet stress was spreading through connections rather than balance sheets. The system was not breaking. It was asking for coordination. Inside Brussels, briefings multiplied. Data was shared. Scenarios were modeled. Each institution saw the risk from its own angle. No one disagreed that vigilance was needed. What remained unclear was who should move first, and how visibly. Early proposals focused on reassurance. Statements were drafted, then softened. Tools were reviewed, then held in reserve. The fear was not collapse. It was precedent. Acting too early could signal weakness. Acting alone could fracture unity. Waiting felt safer. Markets sensed a hesitation before it was acknowledged. Volatility did not spike. It drifted. Participants adjusted positioning cautiously, watching not prices, but policy language. Silence was interpreted not as calm, but as uncertainty. Inside national capitals, patience thinned. Some urged action, others urged restraint. Brussels weighed every signal against the risk of overreaction. In doing so, it consumed the very resource markets value most during stress. Time. By the moment clarity arrived, behavior had already shifted. Liquidity retreated at the margins. Confidence thinned quietly. The system had not panicked. It had prepared for the possibility that coordination might arrive late. Brussels had not failed. It had hesitated. And in modern finance, hesitation can be enough to reshape outcomes before a single decision is made. As the delay extended, behavior adjusted in anticipation rather than response. Banks did not wait for instruction. They shortened horizons, conserved liquidity, and reduced exposure where coordination fell uncertain. These were not defensive moves driven by fear. They were rational adjustments to ambiguity. Markets reflected the same logic. Funding became more selective. Liquidity thinned not across the board, but at the seams where cross-border assurance mattered most. The system remained orderly, yet its connective tissue weakened. Europe was not fragmenting. It was decoupling cautiously. Inside Brussels, the complexity of the moment became harder to manage. Every option carried cost. Acting decisively risked appearing divided if consensus fractured. Waiting risked allowing national responses to diverge anyway. The framework designed to ensure unity was testing unity itself. Officials refined language repeatedly. Each word was weighed for unintended signal. Strength had to be projected without provoking alarm. Caution had to be shown without implying paralysis. The result was communication that satisfied process more than markets. Clarity gave way to balance. Balance gave way to delay. National authorities began preparing independently. Contingency tools were readied quietly. Liquidity support was planned at home rather than collectively. No one announced these steps. But markets sensed preparation happening in parallel rather than together. The center was not absent. It was slow. What made the hesitation costly was not the absence of action, but the erosion of expectation. Markets do not require constant intervention. They require belief that coordination will arrive before fragmentation sets in. That belief weakened minute by minute. By the time Brussels reached alignment internally, the environment had changed. Measures that would have reassured earlier now felt reactive. The window for frictionless coordination had narrowed. Confidence had not collapsed. It had adjusted downward. The episode revealed a difficult truth. In complex systems, legitimacy and speed often pull in opposite directions. Process protects unity. Timing protects function. When stress rises quietly, choosing between them becomes unavoidable. Brussels was learning that coordination delayed is coordination diminished. And in that realization, the cost of hesitation became impossible to ignore. The consequences surfaced in places no communique E9 could reach. Cross-border lending slowed further. Institutions that once relied on shared backstops began acting as if those backstops might arrive too late. Liquidity was not withdrawn aggressively. It was reserved. The system was still functioning, but it was no longer trusting timing. Inside Brussels, the shift was finally acknowledged. Data showed that fragmentation risk was rising not because fundamentals had worsened, but because confidence and coordination had thinned. The danger was no longer hypothetical. It was behavioral. Europe's architecture was intact, yet its rhythm was faltering. When action finally came, it arrived with precision, but less effect than hoped. Statements were issued, tools were clarified, commitments were restated. None of it was wrong. All of it would have been powerful days earlier. Now, markets listened carefully and adjusted cautiously. Institutions responded by maintaining defensive posture even as reassurance arrived. Once behavior adapts, it does not reverse instantly. Liquidity did not rush back. Risk appetite did not rebound. The system needed time to believe again. Regulators understood the implication immediately. Hesitation had not caused the crisis. It had changed the baseline. Europe had lost the benefit of acting before doubt took hold. What followed would be stabilization, not restoration. The episode forced an uncomfortable reassessment. Coordination frameworks designed for legitimacy were too slow for subtle stress. They excelled at visible crises. They struggled with quiet ones. The challenge was no longer authority. It was tempo. Brussels had acted, but the market had already moved. And in finance, catching up is always harder than staying ahead. The lesson settled slowly but firmly. Unity delayed can still function, but it functions at higher cost. Trust, once thinned, must be earned back through consistency, not declarations. The day Brussels hesitated did not end in collapse. It ended in recalibration, and that recalibration would shape how Europe approached its next moment of quiet stress. The recovery was gradual and uneven, shaped more by repetition than reassurance. Markets did not respond to a single signal. They responded to consistency over time. Brussels maintained alignment. Messages stayed firm. Actions matched language. Slowly, behavior followed. Liquidity returned first at the margins. Cross-border flows resumed cautiously. Institutions tested coordination in small ways before committing fully. Confidence rebuilt not because hesitation was forgotten, but because it was not repeated. Reliability replaced urgency. Inside policy circles, the episode prompted a hard reckoning. Speed had to be treated as a form of stability. Legitimacy mattered, but so did tempo. Coordination could no longer wait for visible distress. Quiet stress required early motion, even at the risk of acting before consensus felt complete. Frameworks evolved accordingly. Decision pathways were shortened. Triggers clarified. Responsibility for early action became less diffuse. Europe did not abandon its collective model. It refined it to recognize that hesitation itself carries cost. The day Brussels hesitated became a reference point not for failure, but for learning. It showed that unity is strongest when it moves before markets demand it. That process must serve function, not replace it. Europe emerged more aware of its own timing. Not faster in every case, but more intentional about when speed matters most. The system retained its strength, but gained a sharper sense of rhythm. The lesson endures beyond that moment. In modern finance, stability is not only about what you do, it is about when you do it. And sometimes, the difference between confidence and caution is measured not in policy, but in minutes. So what do you think? Are we repeating the same mistake again? The day